Thanks for the download. Usual admin before we start the episode. It'd be great if you could rate the podcast on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from, as this helps me know how we're doing and brings it to attention of potential listeners. If you want to support the podcast, the best way to do this is via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes, and I'm grateful for recent contributors helping to keep production costs to the minimum. This is the third episode in the life of SBS and clearance diver Terry Powell. And on this one, we discuss the training he carried out immediately after passing SBS selection, including Halo and HAHO training, a patrol medic attachment to our hospital, diving training and development, and working on swimmer delivery vehicles in the UK and alongside US Navy SEAL teams in the States. Let's crack on. Welcome back, Terry. So, having passed SBS selection, you remained in the unit for the next 19 years. How did your career progress during this time?
It's a good question, well put, and thank you again for having me back. We actually finished with 9 people on the course, 6 of which, with no disrespect to anybody else, were X-45 Commando, me, of course, being one of them, the Mountain and Arctic Warfare Commando Unit, or the Penal Battalion, as we used to call it, because if you were a bad lad, get to Arbroath. But we loved it up there, and that's where we ended up. So 6 out of 9. We had one retread from the previous course, but sadly, he didn't get through on the final exercise. So yeah, after that, it was, okay, lads, well done. You've passed, you failed. And off we went to Bryce Norton for the parachute course. Those of us who hadn't qualified had to go there for the 4-week basic para course. Now, I mean, we went to Weston-on-the-Green for the balloon jumps out of the basket. And of course, that was like everyone's worst nightmare because it was a dead drop. I mean, you got to the edge of that basket, you know, you're hanging on for dear life as it's being, it goes up the riser, this balloon. And of course, you know, I always remember the PGI was up there. He said, right, at this stage, don't look out, just look at the horizon. Right, you tell us a joke. And no one could tell a joke. We were so, oh my God, I'm going to die. We're all hooked on. But of course, we knew it took us about 200 to 300 foot for the parachute to deploy. So if you fell out, you were going to hit the deck without your parachute opening. And then from there, the SBS lads would then progress on to water jumps with the 22-foot steerables, because that's all they do. They steer. They don't do, and they're not like the square rigs that we have. The GQ or then. So the water jumps again, typically in a pool off Studland there. But to talk you through the para course, going back in it was at Bryce Norton and Weston-on-the-Green. The other men that were left, they went off to Hereford actually to partake in escape and evasion exercises. They thoroughly enjoyed it. Don't forget, they've just done selection, so this is fiddles. So off to H they went. And we went off and did the water jumps. But coming out of helicopters and all the rest of it, yeah, that was awesome because you have that dead drop. There's nothing to work against. Not that you needed it, but it was. I don't think I jumped with my eyes open once. You know, and then when you think the Pathfinders, they reduced the height down to something like 600 a foot or something. I was like, mad. I said, wait, why do you need a reserve? I don't think they jumped with reserves in World War II. There was no need because you weren't going to get a chance to use it. You were too low. So that really was the start of my time in the SBS, as it were, as a fully badged SC3. So went off to 2 SBS round about 1980, Norway, stuff like that. It really wasn't that much of an adventure, as it were. But again, it was a reality check because, you know, welcome to the real world, Terry. Like I said, when we finished our commando training, I went to 4-5 Commando and I just thought, oh my God, what's hit me here? The weight of these men. And, you know, they were so much stronger and experienced. But you got all that. Again, that was in the SBS. You thought you knew everything. But once you got out on the ground with these guys and, again, packing extra kit like we do as SF, then, yeah, it became really quite arduous. But we got there and it was good fun. You know, trialing the pulks for the audience. A pulk is like a sled. We normally have 2 men pulling that pull. And in that, you know, we would not normally travel with it, but we were trialing diving in the fjord. So advancing to a position over the mountains, to the edge of a fjord, setting up a tent, getting the divers dressed, getting them in the water, let them do the ship attack, and then return, and then dealing with two men who've just been under the water for a couple of hours, in a fjord for a couple of hours, freezing, and then getting them in, getting them de-rigged, getting them back on the skis and getting them back on, operational. I mean, so we had not only our own kit, we'd have to then carry all their diving kit, the CO2 absorbent, the canisters, the diving sets, everything that went with it, the weight, typically £20 per diver, all going in the pulk and a bit more, plus your own kit. So again, like the canoes when we were portaging, it was so heavy. So the pulks, I've always been a great advocate, and they brought it in years later, but I wish they'd just listened. The snowshoes with the one-man pulks, every man, I believe, shouldn't have to carry that weight on his back. You've got your E&E kit always stuffed at the top of your Bergen, so if you got a contact, you couldn't ski away with all that kit. You dump the majority of your kit, but in the top of your Bergens, wherever we operated, that'd be the first thing you'd grab. You grab bag, go, and you knew you could survive on that. But I always said, why don't we just have a pull? One man can, which they do have now. And it'd be far easier for contact drills and all the rest of it, and surviving more than anything. Especially as a small team, you're not with the commando unit anymore. But they don't listen because it's not their idea, and it's got to cost money. But I'm saying, this is the way ahead. So all the sorts of trials side of life, we got there eventually, because they got skidoos, no scooters and everything now, jet drive, power packs things and all this. So yeah, as I say, time will tell. So yeah, the changing in the field, freezing, and again, teaching the Arctic survival, snow holes and all the rest of it with our lads, because a lot of them hadn't been to Norway, who were SF. We always had an ML1 attached to us from the Corps, typically 4-5 commando then. So they were always on hand for health and safety reasons. But I mean, we got on with the majority of the training because the MLs knew that actually there wasn't much we couldn't do or teach them, especially skiing and with heavy weights and stuff like that, through, advanced signals type training. And then my company squadron commander came in and said to Wiggy, who was the signals guy, the sergeant, he says, anyone actually doing quite well here? And he went, well, Terry's doing all right. He said, he's really just sat there twiddling his thumbs. We're all trying to get to like 12 words a minute on Morse code. And he said, why? He said, well, can I have a word? I got dragged out of the classroom. And he said, look, Terry, he said, he's quite happy, the SC1, the signals, S1's quite happy with your performance. Would you like to go on a Halo course? Because you are where you should be. And I said, well, what's that? He said, high altitude, low open. And I said, oh, my God, I've only just got in. I mean, yeah, of course I'll do it, So off I went to Bryce Norton again to do a Halo course, which consisted of Western on the Green, Fox Covert and Salisbury Plain, and Pau in France. So, yeah, I said, boss, I'm your man. I love parachuting. Gives me a buzz. So off I went to Western on the Green, and we started off jumping out of helicopters to get a feel. And again, in free fall, it's very difficult to work against nothing that hasn't got a slipstream. So when you jump out of the C-130s, you're straight into the slipstream, and you're there. You're manoeuvring. You've got a force to work against. Helicopters, no. You're just going down on your back, arms are like a spider, a dead fly, and then until you get that up thrust, and then you can spin over. You don't do that, obviously, when you're trained, but the first couple of jumps is like, what is going on? Because I'm letting nowhere in. I'm going to hit the deck, but you're 12,000 feet or 10,000. So, yeah, we started off there from a Wessex helicopter, jumping out of that. Did a few jumps then on Salisbury. Then we went to Pau, into the Pyrenees, that way, with the French parachute school. And we got some really good jumps. You can only jump to 20,000 feet out there. As you know, Halo was, I'm not sure what they do now, but we were restricted to 25,000 on oxygen at night with full kit, normally in a 4-man team. So Pau was great because we got the airspace. It's very difficult to jump in the UK on a regular basis. Hence, when we go on later to America, that's why they go out there, or so the RAF say. But I'm happy to go along with them on that one, because it's a nice trip to California. So yeah, Fox Covert, get the basics out of the way, and then off to Pau, do the jumps out there. That was great. And then, of course, we were coming back from Powell. But whilst I was out there, that's right, whilst I was out there, the squadron leader who come out from Bryce, again, a cracking guy, Pete, and he's, right, just so you know, lads, I think it was something like, we've got a visitor coming out. Who's that? Prince Charles. He's the head of the parachute regiment. And he's obviously linked into the French parachute school. Because again, it was all new to me. Because, I mean, I was watching this parachute drop with the French. And then they all get into this field and they're all saying, right, roll your parachutes up. They stood the helmets off and all this hair. All these women. I couldn't believe it. What are they doing? Are they lost? So, yeah, then that was it. Rehearsals. And, of course, squadron leader this, group captain that. They flew all the wives out. Why are they coming out? Right, so your job is to jump out of the airplane at 12,000 feet as a four-man team, 2 four-man teams, and then off you go into the ether, do a bit of grouping, and then Prince Charles will be watching everything that's going on. So we said, right, great, let's do it. So off we went. Of course, we rehearsed, and it was like, and then when you land, you'll all be lined in an L shape. And Terry, you'll be here with your backs because all the press is going to be here, very, very. I said, yeah, great. I said, so you'll all be stood in this part of the L. And on that side, all the wives and the dignitaries, that's where they're going to be. And of course, he hasn't got much time, Terry. So, or group or team, lads. So he's just going to come in as Land Rover, say a quick hello to squadron leader and his wife, group captain XYZ and his wife and all his hangers on. And then I'm afraid he's going to go. But obviously you guys won't get any photographs taken of you. And that's, we've got all that covered. Okay, yeah. So we went up 12,004. Everything went to a bag of shit. I mean, the red light came on. People weren't doing the job. Someone got hung up on something else. In fact, one of the para-regiment lads, para-reg guys, the Pathfinders, we were just about to jump out. And I could see this thing fluttering. And I thought, I wonder what that is. Because we're all ready to go. Because he just goes straight off the tailgate. And, of course, he's going forward. I went, it's a parachute. Oh, my God. Because if that grabs you, that's it, you're dead. So his spring, the kicker spring in the parachute, it got caught on the netting on the seats in the C-130. And as he stood up, his parachute deployed inside the aircraft. But we couldn't see it. Because, of course, the PGIs are doing this. Hey. And he said, well, I said, look behind you. And he went straight on his knees because, oh, my God, that was a death wish. So anyway, it all went to a bag of worms. So, yeah, Poe, Fox Covert, we then come back then for our qualifying jumps. But we got everybody back and we passed the course. Then went off on the paramedics course. That was the next course. Again, I must have been the blue-eyed boy because a position came available and my boss said, right, off you go. We need paramedics. Registered emergency medical technicians. Off you go to Hereford and, have a good time. So off I went with the SAS, all their lads, G Squadron, B Squadron, they all there. And one lad, he was the Royal Army Medical Corps, Dave from Manchester. I teamed up with him. So we all had pairs for the future. And Dave was RAMC Corporal. And actually, Dave was in that awful helicopter accident down south. He got out the back of the helicopter when all the other lads died. And he came to see me in Poole after that. I didn't know he'd gone down in the helicopter, but the back end of the helicopter broke off during the Falklands War and Dave swam out. But that's another story. So really good to see him. But yeah, myself and Dave, we teamed up from the start, really. And he was a good lad. He was very knowledgeable, being a RAMC guy. And off we bloody went. We did the course and I actually finished with an award on arthropods and from John Hill Grundy, some jungle, he studied bugs and everything, and we were given sort of tests on this, that and the other. And I got awarded a signed book from the author on tropical medicine. And I also submitted a mini thesis on, what's it do? Oh yeah, intrinsic and extrinsic heart control, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I really loved that course. It was a fantastic course. I wish if I'd have had the time or I've had my life again, would I change it? Yeah, I'd love to be a doctor because it was just amazing what we did on that course. So, yeah, it really got into the weeds. So you're doing all the theory now at Hereford. And it's very condensed, very detailed. But yeah, you've got to get on with it. You've got to pass. There's no if, buts, or maybes, because then you're going to go to a proper hospital and you've got to know what you're doing. You're always supervised anyway by a consultant, a senior consultant, and you get to watch different things and assist in different things. I won't go into too much detail because I don't know what the legalities of that are. But one of the things I'll always remember was the SAS lads. I was the only bootneck on that course, and me and Dave teamed up, as I said. But we were doing, you get qualified then to administer drugs, sort of pharmaceutical side of life. So you have to know all your drugs, the dosages, what they're for, minor surgical procedures, all that stuff you do. And we got onto anaesthetics. Our tutors, who were both warrant officers in the Royal Army Medical Corps, brilliant guys. I mean, they were fellows of the Royal Tropical School of Medicine. So they were high flyers, and they were only guys who were non-doctors who had that award. One of them was Irish, and he said, right, today we're doing anaesthetics. And we said, oh, okay, for suturing up wounds, so you'll always inject the wound site, the head being the most difficult one to inject an anaesthetise, and the foot, well, that's the most painful. But we were going through that, and they said, look, for minor injuries, we've got certain lignocaine, which is injection, or lignogel. Both anaesthetics, they both do the same job. But if your patient doesn't like the needles going in, then you can always try this if it's just a very small wound. Oh, right, okay. Well, we had this guy from the regiment on the course, obviously, who loved testing. He loved testing things out. And he'd come in and we say, look, you're not supposed to do that. Yeah, well, I tried it on the kids and I did this. Well, we got to the anaesthetics and he came in the next morning and he put his hand up and he went, I've got a question. He was Irish. He said, I've got a question. Irishman to Irishman. What's that then? He said, that lignogel stuff. It doesn't work. And the tutor says, oh, what do you mean it doesn't work? He said, I took a tube home. What have I told you? I'll say, you're not supposed to take it. He said, well, I did. I tried it on the missus when we were having sex. And she couldn't feel a thing. And of course, they're all wearing bulk. I said, mate, what? Did you rub it on your penis? Yeah, of course I did. Because I wanted to last the course. And the missus wouldn't feel nothing, so it's no good, is it? And we go, well, that's what it's done. You've anaesthetised your wife internally. So... Lignogel, World War II Paris. So I got to a hospital. I won't say where I went, but it was a cracking hospital. Lots of trauma, lots of fights, stabbings and stuff like that. That's what you're looking for. In fact, talking of cities, I think Cardiff was the worst for knife crime at the time. So couldn't get there. So I went down the south coast somewhere and met some wonderful, wonderful people, doctors and consultants and people like that. And the patients were all as bad as hatters. I mean, we had an ex-German parachute regiment guy from World War II. So I'd always walk around with an A&E. We're in A&E, basically, learning the trade, suturing people up. And, of course, Rose, bless her, she was in her 60s then, but she was a nurse in the war, and she taught me a lot about, treating wounds with different methods that they used then, because they didn't have what we have today, and it worked, stopping infections and all that. So she was a really lovely lady, and dare I say, she's probably passed away by now. And likewise with the other consultants that we had the privilege of working with. They took me to see, Rose obviously knew my background. No one knows where you're from when you get there, only the doctors and the consultants. Terry, you were in the Marines? Yes. Come with me. She said, I want you to meet this German fella. So I said, who is he? She said, well, he was in World War II, and he's always trying to kill himself. He's just got this thing in his head. And, you come and talk to him, because you can talk the same language, but just trying to calm him down. So I goes into his room, and there he is, Herman the German, all battered and bruised. He has this habit of driving his Norton Commando 750 motorbike into brick walls. I said, how many times has he done that? She said, he does it all the time. She says, but have a word. He might make him a bit happier because he's an ex-military guy. So there's all sorts of those people he has to deal with as well. So, yeah, driving his motorbike in, but he was more upset about wrecking his motorbike. And then, of course, when the football teams were playing and stuff like the Division 1, I'd lose track of time because there's that many injuries to deal with stabbings and fights, and the cruise ships as well, people going for insurance claims, throwing themselves through glass doors, people who were committing suicide and phoning up saying, I'm going to kill myself, right? And he'd go out in the ambulances on the motorways. As the lead, really, because you were a qualified registered emergency medical technician. So you could defibrillate, you could give injections, you could administer drugs intravenously. Nurses can't do that or couldn't then. And I used to get into a lot of trouble where I said, come on, use me as your test dummy and stick as many needles in you want. Oh, and then the sister calls us. Oh, she went mad. Mr. Powell, what are you doing? I'm letting them. I'm teaching them. I said, they should be able to know how to do this on a living being. So, yeah, you were all over the place. What a buzz. So, that was more or less straight after the free fall as well. So I had a fantastic time there. And I then went back after the Falklands and learned a bit more. As a paramedic anyway, lots of action down there for me and things to do as well as do my job. But they sent me on a refresher course. You have to refresh every 18 months. So off I went to another hospital and had a great old time down there, met lots of good people. And the good thing about it was I'd come back from the Falklands and I was invited then to go to a place where all the paramedics had civilian paramedics had a big conference, Yarmouth, Great Yarmouth. And I was invited by my consultants, actually, to get up and give a talk on burns, because we'd learned so much about treating burns after what happened to the sailors and the soldiers on the ships and all the rest of it, because the first thing I did was treat guys off the Sheffield. So it was really interesting to them, and they said, we don't know, they didn't understand about the plastic bags or the flamazine and the other bits and pieces we'd used. So please tell us all about that. So that was great. And also gunshot wounds, because they were very, very limited experience within the medical profession, actually, on people who got gunshot wounds. One of the consultants, actually, I had an argument with him, or a discussion, because we had a gunshot wound coming in. Turns out it was nothing, but they were panicking like mad. And I said, don't worry. I said, it'll be fine. I said, I've dealt with these before. I said, so when he comes into the A&E, but they wanted to do their thing. And I was just like a guest. And then we had a debrief. He shot himself between the toes with his bloody tutu or something. It wasn't nothing. It was nothing. It was really quite a letdown, because I was expecting major trauma and we could get really stuck in. But then when we had the debrief, it was just so typical then. I said, well, I noticed we did a lot of debriding, Terry, and you did this. You've got to realise that the wounds are sterile. And I just went, what? He said, well, the wound's sterile. Once the bullet goes in, it's so hot, it cauterizes everything. I said, what planet are you on? I said, because it's dragging in all sorts of dirt and clothing and all that. I said, you've got to debride. You've got to treat that wound for infection. I said, it's not clean. It's not anything anywhere near it. Anyway, they couldn't understand that. But then they learned from it. So that was good for them, for the civilian medical world, to understand a bit more about gunshot wounds.
Yeah, it's interesting you say about keeping the wounds clean, because I remember when I was young, there was a documentary came on about the red and green life machine. I remember they got this casualty in, and I think he had a gunshot wound to the thigh, a British guy. And they got him on the table, cut all his clothes off. And then this surgeon, obviously the guy was anaesthetised, thankfully.
Yeah.
But going back to your reference about cleaning wounds, they got all this, must have been like disinfectant or whatever, poured it all over his wound. And then this surgeon got a scrubbing brush.
Yeah.
And literally scrubbed that wound. And then for civilians that listen that might not know as well, you see in the film, they sew up gunshot wounds. You never do that in case you get gas gangrene, because a gunshot wound heals from the inside out, doesn't it? So they've got to leave the wound exposed.
Well, delay primer in future, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's about, you say that infection control. But interestingly, every person, every soldier that got into the red and green life machine, or every soldier and Marine, whoever, if they got into the red and green life machine alive, nobody died, which is a remarkable, remarkable achievement with what they had out there.
Well, that's the famous photograph in that book that Rick wrote of me standing on Fanning Head with the guys we just shot. And I'm hoping to meet him shortly, go to Argentina, because he's finally tracked me down. Miguel Garcia. He's a lovely man. And he works quite a lot with veterans, and they've been looking for me for 40-odd years. Who's that man in the photograph? And it was a guy out in Paris said, well, actually, he's just wrote something on Facebook about, I think I wrote an article about Kiwi who got killed by blue on blue. And that's the guy called Terry Powell. And he got in touch with me and he said, you're the only man out of everybody he met, the nurses, the doctors, the ships, the crew, the Royal Marine bandies who looked after him. They're desperate to know who you are. Can I tell them who you are? I said, of course you can. So after 40 odd years, Miguel found out about me. And we talk quite regularly, and he's a lovely man, but he doesn't speak English. But we've got Google Translate, so we're all right. So one SBS is the Maritime Counter-Terrorist Team. So I've come back from the Falklands. I get stuffed in there then to do all that. And so we're doing all the oxygen files on the rebreather sets, the new rebreather sets, a selection actually of Draeger and Scoba and all these other companies that were vying for our trade, as it were, or trying to get our money out of the MOD. I was sent off to the Institute of Naval Medicine and a place called the Admiralty Experimental Diving Unit, I think it's called, at Alverstoke, which is just across the road in South Sea, Gosport rather. And I was there for about 3 weeks and went through all sorts of trials and stuff like that. There was me and my mate, who was a super keen fitness triathlete. I think he was rated 7th in the world at the time. This is back in the early 80s, and he eventually left to follow his career in sport. But, so me and him went down there and we said, right, what do we do? And, of course, you get in the experimental diving tank, you're under pressure, you're wet. There's all sorts of rigs that go on and stuff they stick in you, not surgically, but up your backside and all that, rectal thermometers and all that. And, of course, that has to be done. So the scientists, because it's nothing to do with the Navy, the scientists have to monitor everything while you're going through, looking at your blood gases. And so it's all physiological type stuff and the endurance of the set. And one of the things you do with a rebreather, you have CO2 absorbent. It doesn't matter what it is. And that's what it's for, is to take out that bad gas so you can rebreathe. Not pure O2, because pure O2 is very dangerous. I mentioned this at the hospital when I was putting people under, working with the anaesthetist. And she was asking me, and she said, Terry, you're a diver, so you'll understand about nitrogen and oxygen and all the other gases. I said, well, yeah, so I'm talking about the different percentages that they use for putting people under. And she said, well, and you breathe oxygen. She said, so how long are you on oxygen for? And I said, well, it's typically with the new R5. I said, you get up to about 2 hours. She nearly fell off a stool. She said, is that oxygen? And I said, well, yeah. She said, we're not allowed to give you oxygen for any more than 20 minutes. And with babies, because it burns your lungs, pure oxygen. So she said, I'm amazed. And I said, well, that's what we do. I said, but it's not pure oxygen because it's gone through a rebreather. But again, we did all that sort of trial with a very, very competent scientific group of people, all working for the Ministry of Defence. Yeah, it was great. It was a great 4 weeks. We had goats down there. The goats in the recompression chamber, but they stopped using goats in 2007 for decompression trials or recompression trials because it was, animal rights and all the rest of it. And the goats were the nearest thing we could get to, giving them purposely a bend. So the goats were very, very, they're very clever. So one of the scientists took me into the field. He said, what's this? He said, watch the goats. He said, look at them all. He said, they're all walking around eating the grass or whatever. He said, now, as soon as I come around this corner, watch what happens. And he walked around the corner and the goat started limping. And I went, what's happened? He said, that's what they do. They know that when you see me, it's going to be painful. So they, for some reason, know we cannot ethically put them animals in a chamber if they're ill. He said, and I didn't believe him. I would not. No one could tell me that was possible. He said, I'll prove it again. So come on. And then just poke your head around. Yeah, there they are. They're all okay, aren't they? Yeah. All right, come on, I'll walk out now with my white coat on and my wellies. Typical sciences. And the goat started limping. So you couldn't put it in the chamber. Not that he was, but he was just trying to demonstrate to me how clever these little goats are. And the goat got his revenge, actually, because another team came down later on, just for the crack, I think. We'd more or less finished the trial. One of the lads who was there, it wasn't well thought of at the time. Not that that's anything to do with him. But someone decided that, well, how long is he going to go in the chamber for this time? Oh, we're going to do a 3-hour dive. Oh, okay then. Or 2-hour dive. right? So they went and got the goats out the field while he was in the water, and they put him in his room. And of course, when he came back and he got dressed, and he went into his room, the goats had pooed everywhere, ate all his gear, and he still to this day doesn't know who did it. Anyway, that's a little bit of the goat's revenge, as it were. And then, of course, on the last dive, we were going for an endurance on the CO2 absorbent. Now, remembering that the permitted safe or duration then, I think we were like 2.5 hours on the LAR5. And the head scientist said to me, Terry, it's a Friday. Do you want to do something that we've never done before? And I said, go on, because I was always in for experiments. I loved it. I said, what? He said, well, the Navy are telling me the CO2 absorbent is dangerous after a certain part of time. I want to prove them wrong. Are you up for it? I said, yeah. What are we going to do? He said, we're going to see how long it lasts. I said, well, how are we going to do that? I said, because the O2 will run out. Oh, no, he said, I've got a plan. I'll rig 150 cubic foot bottle of oxygen to your set. And they're like 4 foot high, with actually cylinders like that. So I said, oh, okay then. And he said, we'll just go. We'll just dive until the readings are reaching the danger level. And I said, yeah, fine. I said, I'll say nothing. I said, but it'll prove a point, won't it? Because they always had P for plenty, the Navy, for safety reasons. And then after about 5.5 hours, I'm down there, because you're working all the time as well. You're not just lying there. You're actually on an electronic type bike where you've got to keep the lights green and, all the rest of it working as if you're combat swimming. So I said, right, okay. And he sort of come on the hydrophone. He said, right, Terry, come on. That's enough. I think we've proved the point. And I go, how long's that then? That's over 5 hours. He said, come on. So we bring the chamber up. And then when I got out, I collapsed. And I was paralysed. And I couldn't work out why. So they rushed me across the road to I&M. And I gave this talk to the Historical Diving Society some months ago. And typical doctors and scientists, they love sticking things in you. So they didn't know what was wrong with me. So they laid me out on the table. Oh, panic, he's paralysed from the neck down. What could be the problem? Well, let's start sticking stuff in her. So all the needles come out. And the other thing, like a cowboy spurs with all needles, and they're rolling it up and down my body. So can you feel that? And I go, no, I can't feel a thing. So back in the recompression chamber, and they gave me the right table. But they reckon it was all to do with the O2 levels, so the brain stem and all the rest of it. And again, I have similar things later on in America. So yeah, paralysed on that. That was great. And then moving on from the diving. So we finally selected the LAR5. We did practical trials up in Scotland on it, diving in the locks up there and portaging it across country to see if I'm parachuting with it and all the other good stuff. Other stuff we did was with port down and CR gas, not CS gas. CR gas is 100 times worse. That was a good experiment. Anyway, it was for maritime. It was for the counter-terrorist side of life. CS gas is no good. CR gas is a totally different ball game. CQB, lots and lots of shooting in the killing house. I don't think they call it that anymore, not allowed to. But health and safety was creeping in then. We found this because we had a bunch of civil servants come down from somewhere in London to watch us in the killing house. We had a nice big gallery, and then we'd go in. It was all rubber backed and that, to stop any, fragging. And it was all live. And then, of course, one of the things, you go in, do the room entry as your 4-man team, take out the terrorists, try and save the hostage. As we said, that if you come out with a hostage, then it's a bonus, because that's the way it was then. And, of course, one of the ladies said, I said, I noticed you shot the dummy twice in the head. And I said, well, yeah, that's what you do. She said, well, why do you do it twice? I said, well, we actually call it a double tap. I said, there's a process. As soon as you go in with your primary weapon, it's a double tap to the head, and then you deal with. Oh, she said, that's not ethical. Because you can't shoot him twice. I said, what do you mean? I said, I've got to make sure he's dead. I said, I can't just enter the room and then leave him. I said, and if you hit people in the head, there's a better chance of killing them, because the terrorists, will wear body armour. Oh, she said, I'm going to take this up when I get back to London. She said, I'm not having that. So again, you could see it creeping in then in the 80s. You go, what are these people smoking? Anyway, that was counter-terrorism and CQB. Right, so there was all that going on, unconventional maritime operations. That's something that we were specialising in at the time, rescuing people from captivity at sea, things like that. Not necessarily counter-terrorists, but normal people like scientists and that who may have been kidnapped and stuff. All good stuff. Whilst we were there, we then went on a fast glide. I think maybe it was and that was a Halo course. 8 of us. SBS exercise flash glide. Went out to Powell again. Had a great time out there, just jumping till the cows come home and drinking all the wine in the officers' mess, which they brew themselves. It's like, oh, we dropped a bottle of it on the floor. One of the RAF guys, the PGIs, Tommy, was Glaswegian, and he was a really good folk singer. And we were having a PU at the end, and they have it in a big barrel, and it's all down in the cellar at the parachute school in Powell. And the French waiters in the officers' mess, they say, "Oh no, sir, monsieur, please take some water." Get out of it. Don't need that. Anyway, that night Tommy was on his guitar and he was brilliant. And the wine had been dripping on the floor. And we got up the next morning and all the tiles peeled back off the mess floor in the officers' mess. So it just showed you how potent it was. So yeah, that was that. And great. MCC, we were sort of perfecting climbing techniques with prusik loops and caving ladders and plummets, big, what you see the Coast Guards maybe using. So we perfected that and brought all that into being with various companies in the UK. Multi-release, again, going down on the outside of the submarine and then swimming away from that. And then exit and re-entry, as I said, from 5-man chambers on the O-boats, the Ocelot, Otis, other O-boats. I was a team leader at this stage, so, I was a good boy. And they made me and my mate corporals as team leaders in the MCT team. And we got on famously. So we had lots of cross-training as well with other SF units like GSG-9, the SAS. Although they were land, they were our backup. So when a ship's at anchor, we'll do the dive, and then they'll come in afterwards and take the top end. If the ship's alongside, it's their option. So they'll go in, whatever. So there's an alongside option and a ship at sea option. So if it's at sea and it's underway and all the rest of it, we do that. But the SAS tend to go in first for the land options, and we're perfecting ways in which they're doing that, like them being hoisted up in buckets on cranes and things. SEAL Team 6, again, they were just in the formative years, really. So a lot of stuff that they took from our books, as it were, SOPs, etc. Commando Hubert, the French, we did it all with everybody, because everyone was learning. Then again, I was sent on a HALO, so I'd done the HALO trials off to El Centro in California, which is sadly many years later we lost a guy out there training. So HALO, HALO, high altitude, high opening. They invited me, Boscombe down, to go out with the teams, the scientists, to trial the new square parachutes for the Special Forces. So there was a gaggle, again, really just me and one other lad from the SBS, and then the majority of the lads were SAS, a couple of Pathfinders, and then we had the really mad jumpers, the base jump, the civvy test jumpers who come out like the Red Bull guys, God, they were mad. But they were good at what they did. Of course, so that was our time out there. El Centro is a big bombing range out there. So, yeah, I mean, that was all good stuff. Air-to-air communications as teams, because, again, hey-ho, you're pulling at about, so if you jump at 20,000 feet, you're pulling at 17,000 feet, and then you're looking for distance across the ground under the canopy. So, again, you've got to be able to communicate. You've got to be warm. There's all sorts of things you've got to do. You've got your thermal kit to trial, night vision goggles, which are not really, they're great under the canopy, but there's always that misjudgment. When you're coming into land, you have to flip your goggles up because it's the perspective of, you think you're going to hit the ground, you're not. And then when you're not ready for it, luckily you're under a square canopy, but it can catch you out. So yeah, all that was going on, purposely jumping out, watching canopies ripping off at altitude and then riding them down, inspecting them and then pulling in reserve before you hit the deck. but we got bored under the canopy, traveling across the desert in California with the teams following us in their trucks. You know, we had a few lads who would say, well, on comms, I think I'll trial this now. Oh, what are you trialing? I'll see how high you can light a cigarette. So I came to Zippo. Have you got a Zippo? Yeah. So he's under the canopy having a smoke. And there was all sorts of different things we did. And we were talking and, you know, we were navigating at this building. I'm going to turn left. So as a team following each other across the sky. And the funny old thing, we landed in a farmer's field. So we had to go because they were going too far off road now and the trucks wouldn't get us. So the team leader said, right, we're going down to that farm there. So taking a left now, right, go on. And then we all went down into this farm. Now we were all dressed in black, armor lights, all the kit, oxygen masks, you name it. Everything was black. And we land in this farm and there's the old American farmer with his pitchfork and he's doing this, baling hay like that. So the team leader said, just stand there, lads. Don't want to upset the locals. The Americans will be here in a minute and they'll explain what's going on. He said, I'll just go and ask where we are so we can radio back and let the recovery teams know. So he goes over. I said, afternoon, sir. Afternoon. Just a quick question. Can you tell us exactly where we are? Where, you know, sort of. And he just turned around and he said, are you guys from Australia? And we all just went, we could have been Martians, you know what I mean? He just looked and said, you guys from Australia? And we'd all just landed in this farmer's yard. And I mean, that just broke the ice. We were laughing our heads off. But they come and got us. And yeah, I think one of the other funny stories I have to say, and it's sad really because he died later on, but Jim Coffey was he's a legend in the parachute regiment, Red Freds as well. And that man jumped. I mean, he had the most jumps I could have than anyone. And Jim was only a slight guy, and he was out on this trial with us. And of course, we had to be off the range because it was a bombing range at a set time of the day. So you book your airspace, you go, you jump, bum, 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 and then the Americans then come in and use it for target practice. So we were on this jump, and Jim come down, and we were under the GQ360s, which is a big 9-cell. Jim's very light, and he got caught on what we call a thermal. So we couldn't get down. It was like, it was keeping him up there. And we had to be off the range, let's say at midday, because the Americans were coming in. We didn't know what they were doing. But they said, right, you've got to be clear of the sky by midday because our guys are coming in. So we're all looking up like this, and Jim's up there going, and he could hear him screaming and laughing, saying, look, I can't come down. This thermal's got me. And then we looked over there and we saw what we thought was a plague of locusts. And it was a heavy drop. Americans, and when you see that, you just go, you haven't got a chance. I mean, all these bombers were coming over and all the parachute lads in 80-second and tanks getting dropped out. And Jim's going, yay! And we're going, no, behind you. And he's going, see, the megaphone saying, get down here now, pull down and get down on the ground. And he couldn't understand why we were all panicking. And then he looked round, he went, oh my God. So straight down on the riser, you know, and down he came. Boy, that was close. But to see that, you know, like I went and watched a fire demonstration in Warminster when I was a platoon weapons instructor. When they come at you with jets, fast jets, and you're in a defensive position, you've had it. You don't want to be in that trench because they just obliterate you. So yeah, that was great. Jumpers. And so regards or respect rather to Jim Coffey, because I know he passed away sadly later on. So yeah, that was Jim. SC2's course had to be promoted then. And then after that, again, that was all, I went through the SC3s were a step up, navigation, diving, all the rest of it, more formulas, more calculations, more Boyle's law, Archimedes principle, and stuff like that. Close target reconnaissance. So again, to get you to the next level. And then the SDV team started, the Summit Delivery Vehicle, and I volunteered for that because to me it was like what I joined Special Forces for. It was a small, unique team. Yes, we've met. If you go back to midget submarines and the X-craft, yeah, I mean certainly very interesting. But this was the SBS's bag, and we've been fighting for this particular battle-winning piece of equipment for many years. But we finally got authority via the Washington, the Pentagon, to take it on. It's an American piece of kit, and they've got a very good history with it and still have today with what they've done with it, and ourselves, of course. So, I volunteered for that, and off we went then to Virginia Beach for the first basic pilot and navigator's course. You actually fly this thing. You're not crawling along the seabed. It's like underwater, but it's like being in a helicopter. So everything's black. It's wet. So you shut the hatches. You're in diving kit and all the rest of it. But in front of you, you've got a huge array of instrumentation. So the left-hand driver, the pilot, he's got the sticks. He's doing all the bow planes and all the altitude and all the rest of it, and flying the boat like you would a normal submarine, but they're nice and dry. And then you've got your navigator with all his systems where you're plotting all your courses underwater, because the boat's quite sophisticated with Dopplers and radars, forward-looking radars and all the rest of it. So I thought, I want a piece of that. That'll be me. So I went out, and I was in the very first team to take that on in the United Kingdom, and in particular in the Special Forces. Had it have been a dry boat, it would have gone to the Royal Navy, because then you got all these little valves to tweak and all the rest of it. But no, it was an SBS project, and no one thought we'd ever achieve what we did, but we did. And we got it into service some years later, and bought our own boats. So that was a really exciting time for us. So we started off with the basic course, in Coronado, San Diego, just across there, where they do the SEAL Team Buds training. So there's a big facility there with a mock-up tank in it and a mock-up SDV and all the rest of it. So you're in there for hours and hours and hours under the water. And believe me, the Pacific, we thought, California, great. You don't need a wetsuit. The Pacific Ocean's freezing, because we were all thinking, it's going to be great. We're all going to California. And then, of course, we came back to the UK then for our Christmas leave. And then we flew back out to Virginia Beach then to do the advanced operator training with the Americans. They were in charge. So, again, we had an officer in charge, a major, Richard Clifford. And I'll mention him now. Richard has passed away, sadly, but he was instrumental. It would never have happened without him. He really drove people hard, and he got what he wanted. He was a hard man to work for, but he knew what he was doing. And he is a legend in the SBS, or for people of my era anyway. So, we did all that, and it went well, and we were really progressing quite well and doing things our way. I mean, the Americans thought we were cheating at one stage, because we'd have exams every Friday, written exams, on various aspects of what the boat did, because it's all about gases and electronics and all this sort of stuff, and all the various pieces that you need to understand. And of course, when it came to the diving side of it, I don't think they realised that we were already very skilled at diving and diving physiology. And then they say, are you cheating because you're getting 100%? Our guys don't get anywhere near that. And we said, well, no, we're not cheating, we just are. And we had a CD1 then as well. So the first time the clearance divers sent one of their lads to us, and we sent a sergeant to them, which I did later. And of course, a clearance diver is all knowledgeable about decompression, recompression, gases. They are proper divers. There's nothing they don't know. So he was there really to help us understand, because SBS, let's just go. Doesn't matter how long we're down for or how deep we go. So the Navy insisted that we had to see a clearance diver first class, which I later qualified to become. That was that. And we did all sorts of good stuff out there. Tandem operations with the Americans, attacking ships, etc., etc. Never plan a reciprocal course for 2 SDVs, because we were going in to take out a mine hunter squadron alongside, which we did. And they were all waiting for us. It was a British Royal Navy mine. And we said, can we attack your ships tonight? Oh, we'll be in the mess having a party. We'll be waiting for you, and we'll let you know when we're here. Well, we got in. We planted all the limpets. Well, you can't, because they were wooden hulled, but you could screw them, or you can use buoyancy under the ships to float the charge, positively buoyant. And then you create a bubble charge. It lifts the ship out of the water. Doesn't matter how big the ship is. And then it breaks its back, and down it comes. And we have done that. We go in, and of course, as we're coming out, the other SUV's running in the creek, in Little Creek in Virginia. And I was the navigator and my obstacle avoidance screen on the computer system was going haywire. And I always remember the senior chief or the master chief saying to me, if you ever see this on your screen, there's another SDV coming out here. And it was like, oh yeah, penny dropped. And all we felt was the CD1, Ian, was in the pilot's seat. And I said, bring it over to starboard. And he pulled the stick over, and both SDVs just missed each other. Because if you collide underwater, it's not the same as on the surface. You will break everything. Even at like 3 or 4 knots, you hit head on or a wall, you know about it. And we've done that out in Gibraltar. So again, I got involved with munitions, limpet design, limpet binds. I submitted designs then for trials because we were leading the world actually then, because I was going to NASA and places like that for thermal, looking at the astronaut program to how we're going to keep ourselves warm in the Arctic and all the rest of it. So, and then going to the North Sea for peeing, because you're under the water for hours and then you're in a dry suit and you've got to be able to have a free flow out to sea one way. All that sort of stuff we were bringing in. The Americans loved it because they'd never dived in cold water, really, in the Arctic. So again, we were leading the design and we were changing bits and pieces on as we went. So yeah, and then I got blowing things up. I love blowing things up. I went and designed a limpet mine, which you couldn't defeat. And I submitted it to MOD to get it built because, again, being a diver and I knew with various ways you can defeat limpet mines, etc., using water, high pressure water. But I went back and they come back and said, no, you're not having it. They said, it works. What you've done, they said, well done, but you can't do it. And I said, well, why not? I said, because, they said, if we take over a harbour and we've planted limpet mines like this on the ships and then they surrender, we want their ships. Good plan, but we can't afford to do that. They said, we'll never be able to put something like that on a ship because you can't defeat it. And I said, okay, fine. It's there in the archive somewhere. So, yeah, we did all that. And as I said, we then finally brought that, we transitioned then, we brought this, as I said, battle-winning piece of equipment into existence. And back to Portland, where we set up our own base, the island, on Monkey Island.
That's it for our episode. Join us next time when we continue Terry's story. And thanks for listening and your continued support and suggestions. Please keep them coming, and our email and social media links are at the bottom of the show notes. You can find us all the usual suspects, including Instagram, Facebook, YouTube and Twitter. And you've downloaded us from iTunes and like the podcast. It would be great if you could leave us a review there or anywhere you get your podcasts from. And finally, thanks again to Nick Beale for his continuing help and offering technical support for his company ISARR. And we'll see you next time on The Unconventional Soldier.